Chapter 7, Mishnah 1. We have learned in Chapter 4, Mishnah 4, and Chapter 6, Mishnah 1, that from the time a person draws spring water to use for mechatas until he sanctifies the water, if he performs an unrelated activity, that is an activity not related to the drawing or sanctifying of his water becomes disqualified for use as mechatas. The following chapter discusses this subject. 5 people filled 5 barrels with spring water in order to perform 5 separate sanctifications, i.e., each person planned to mix Parah ashes into his own barrel. But they changed their minds and decided to perform a single sanctification by transferring all the water into one large barrel and mixing ashes into it. Or the reverse happened. They filled 5 barrels with spring water, intending to transfer them all to one large barrel and perform a single sanctification. But they changed their minds and decided not to transfer the water into one barrel, but rather to perform 5 separate sanctifications, each person mixing ashes into his own barrel. In either case, all the water is valid. No one has performed an unrelated activity that would disqualify the water from being used for mechatas. The law is different, though, where one person fills all the barrels. One person filled 5 barrels with spring water, one barrel after another, in order to perform 5 sanctifications, i.e., he planned to mix ashes into each barrel. Since he planned to sanctify each barrel separately, filling other barrels is an unrelated activity as far as each barrel is concerned. Thus, when he fills the second barrel, he has performed an activity unrelated to the first barrel, and the water in the first barrel becomes disqualified. When he fills the third barrel, the water in the second barrel becomes disqualified, and so on. Even if he changes his mind and decides to transfer all the water into one large barrel and perform a single sanctification by mixing ashes into that barrel, the barrels are nevertheless disqualified. Only the water in the last barrel is valid, because he did not fill another barrel after it. The reverse case. A person filled 5 barrels in order to perform a single sanctification, i.e., while filling the barrels, he planned to transfer all the water into one large barrel into which he would mix ashes. In this case, filling the barrels are not unrelated activities, because he was planning on using them all for a single sanctification, and thus filling all the barrels is regarded as one continuous filling. However, if he then changed his mind and decided not to transfer the water into one large barrel, but rather to perform 5 separate sanctifications, mixing ashes into each barrel separately, only the barrel of water that he sanctified first is valid. This is because each sanctification is an activity that is unrelated to the other barrels. Thus, as soon as he sanctifies the first barrel, the water in the other 4 barrels is disqualified because he has performed an activity unrelated to them. Only the water in the first barrel is valid, since he did not perform any unrelated activity before sanctifying it. The Mishnah discusses a person who filled 5 barrels with the intention of performing a single sanctification, and thus the water is all fit to use, as stated above, but then gave the barrels to another person who sanctified each barrel separately. If he, the person who filled the barrels, said to someone, "Sanctify these 5 barrels for yourself," and the second person sanctified them one after the other, only the barrel of water that he sanctified first is valid. As in the previous case, each sanctification is an activity unrelated to the others. Thus, when he sanctified the first barrel, all the others became disqualified. Only the first barrel is valid, because he did not perform any unrelated activity before sanctifying it. However, if instead of saying, "Sanctify these for yourself," the person who filled the barrel said, "Sanctify these for me," and the second person sanctified them one after the other, they are all valid. In this case, the first person did not give the water to his friend. He kept it for himself and just asked his friend to perform the sanctification. Although the friend performed unrelated activities, i.e., he sanctified other barrels, the water is not disqualified, because the water is not in his possession, and a person cannot disqualify water that is not in his possession by performing an unrelated activity.